December 1944. The Hürtgen Forest. This forest was not like other battlefields. This forest was 50 square miles of dense coniferous trees. This forest was fog. This forest was mud. This forest was cold. This forest was darkness under the canopy. This forest was one of the deadliest places that American soldiers would fight during World War II. The Hürtgen Forest battle had been going on for months. American forces had been fighting in this forest since September. American forces had been fighting continuously for 3 months. The battle had become a nightmare. The battle was grinding attrition. The battle was freezing cold. The battle was impossible to win using conventional tactics. Into this nightmare came Harlan Vickery. Vickery was a Sherman tank gunner. Vickery had been fighting in the Hürtgen Forest. Vickery had been trying to survive in a tank that was inadequate for the mission. The Sherman tank was not built for close forest fighting. The Sherman had a 75mm gun that could not penetrate Panther armor frontally. The Sherman was vulnerable to ambush. The Sherman crews were dying constantly, but Vickery had an idea. Vickery realized that conventional tank tactics would not work in the Hürtgen Forest. Vickery realized that speed and maneuverability were the keys to survival. Vickery realized that the Sherman could turn its turret backward. Vickery realized that a Sherman tank could be positioned facing backward, as a kind of sniper waiting in ambush. Vickery turned his Sherman tank around. Vickery positioned his tank so the gun faced backward. Vickery created a reverse hull-down position. Vickery waited. Vickery watched. A German Panther tank appeared. Vickery fired his gun backward. Vickery destroyed the Panther. Vickery had invented a new tactic. Vickery had created the tank sniper concept. This is the story of Harlan Vickery, and how one gunner's innovation in an impossible situation created a new way of thinking about tank warfare. This is the story of how tactical adaptation can overcome technological disadvantage. This is the story of how innovation emerges from desperation. This is the story of how one person's idea can change how entire organizations operate. Subscribe right now, because this story about how innovation emerges from impossible circumstances and how one person's idea can transform tactical doctrine deserves to reach millions of people who need to understand how organizations adapt and innovate. The Hürtgen Forest was the longest and most brutal forest battle of the entire European campaign. American forces fought in this forest for nearly 4 months. American forces suffered more than 33,000 casualties. German forces suffered more than 28,000 casualties. The casualty rate was higher in the Hürtgen Forest than it would be in the Battle of the Bulge just weeks later. The Hürtgen Forest was a graveyard. Why was the Hürtgen Forest so deadly? The answer was terrain. The forest was dense. The forest blocked visibility. The forest blocked air support. The forest neutralized speed and maneuverability. The forest was perfect for defense and terrible for offense. The forest was where German soldiers could stop American advance. The forest was where American soldiers died. The weather made the forest even worse. December in the Hürtgen Forest was bitterly cold. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Temperatures dropped below 0 Fahrenheit. Snow accumulated. Rain froze on equipment. Weapons jammed from cold. Engines froze. Soldiers froze. The cold was another enemy. The cold was as deadly as German bullets. The Americans called the Hürtgen Forest the Green Hell. The Americans called it this because soldiers were dying constantly. The Americans called it this because soldiers were freezing. The Americans called it this because the forest seemed to have no end. Soldiers would advance through the forest for days and make almost no progress. Soldiers would lose units to enemy fire and see the enemy position seemingly unchanged. Soldiers would attack and attack and attack, but the forest would not yield. The Sherman tank was supposed to break the stalemate. The Sherman tank was supposed to provide firepower and mobile support. The Sherman tank was supposed to help American forces advance. But in the Hürtgen Forest, the Sherman tank was a liability. The Sherman tank was too large for the forest. The Sherman tank's gun could not penetrate Panther or Tiger armor. The Sherman tank was slow. The Sherman tank was vulnerable. German forces had positioned Panther tanks in the forest. Panther tanks were superior to Shermans. Panther tanks had better armor. Panther tanks had better guns. Panther tanks could engage Shermans from beyond effective range. Panther tanks would hide in the forest. Panther tanks would ambush Sherman columns. Panther tanks would destroy Shermans one by one. American tankers called Shermans Ronsons because they were said to light up on the first hit. American tankers understood that their tanks were inadequate. American tankers understood that they were sending their crews to die in inadequate equipment. American tankers understood that they needed new tactics. American tankers understood that conventional tank doctrine would not work in the Hürtgen Forest, like this video, because understanding how people innovate in response to impossible circumstances is essential for every leader in every organization. Harlan Vickery was one of those American tankers. Vickery had been fighting in the Hürtgen Forest. Vickery had seen other Sherman crews die. Vickery had seen Panther ambushes destroy Sherman tanks. Vickery had seen inadequate tactics fail repeatedly. Vickery understood that something had to change. Vickery understood that new approaches were necessary. Vickery understood that crews would continue dying unless tactics changed. Vickery studied the problem. Vickery thought about tank mechanics. Vickery thought about the forest terrain. Vickery thought about how Panther tanks were positioning themselves. Vickery realized something. Vickery realized that Panther tanks were attacking from concealment. Vickery realized that Panther tanks were using the forest for ambush. Vickery realized that American tanks could do the same thing. But how could a Sherman tank use ambush tactics? How could a Sherman tank hide from a Panther? How could a Sherman tank get into position to attack a Panther? Vickery thought about the mechanics of his tank. Vickery thought about how his turret worked. Vickery realized that his turret could rotate 360 degrees. Vickery realized that his tank could be positioned with its gun facing backward. Vickery realized that this backward-facing position could provide an advantage. Vickery explained his idea to his commander. Vickery explained that a tank positioned backward could provide cover for retreat routes. Vickery explained that a tank facing backward could ambush German tanks that were pursuing. Vickery explained that this backward-facing position could be the key to survival in the forest. Vickery's commander authorized the experiment. Vickery's commander understood that conventional tactics were failing. Vickery's commander was willing to try something new. Tell me in the comments if you understand the power of innovation emerging from desperation. Tell me if you recognize that impossible circumstances can force breakthrough thinking. Vickery positioned his Sherman tank in a reverse hull-down position. Hull-down means that the tank is positioned so that only the turret is exposed. Reverse hull-down means that the tank is facing backward, so the gun points backward. Vickery positioned his tank in the forest. Vickery positioned his tank on a slope. Vickery positioned his tank so it could see a forest trail. Vickery waited. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Panther tanks would advance down the forest trail thinking they were pursuing American forces. Panther tanks would come around a bend. Panther tanks would not expect an American tank facing backward. Panther tanks would be caught off guard. Vickery would fire his gun. Vickery would destroy the Panther before it knew what was happening. Vickery would fire his gun backward and retreat forward. A German Panther appeared. The Panther was moving down the forest trail. The Panther was looking for American forces. The Panther did not see Vickery's Sherman positioned backward. Vickery calculated range. Vickery adjusted his gun. Vickery loaded an armor-piercing round. Vickery fired. The backward-facing gun fired. The armor-piercing round struck the Panther. The Panther was hit. The Panther was disabled. The Panther was destroyed. Vickery had done it. Vickery had destroyed a Panther tank from a reverse hull-down position. Vickery had proven that the tactic worked. Vickery had invented the tank sniper concept. Vickery had created a new way of fighting in the Hürtgen Forest. Vickery had shown that innovation could overcome technological disadvantage, like this video, because understanding that innovation can overcome technological disadvantage is essential for every organization facing competitive challenges. The success of Vickery's tactics spread through American tank units. Other tank crews heard about the reverse hull-down position. Other tank crews understood the concept. Other tank crews began implementing the tactic. Tank crews began positioning their Shermans in reverse positions. Tank crews began waiting in ambush. Tank crews began destroying Panther tanks. Tank crews began surviving encounters that previously would have killed them. The reverse hull-down tactic was not officially doctrine. The reverse hull-down tactic was not in the tank manual. The reverse hull-down tactic was innovation emerging from the battlefield. The reverse hull-down tactic was crews adapting to survive. The reverse hull-down tactic was soldiers thinking on their feet. The reverse hull-down tactic was innovation born from desperation. But why was this tactic so powerful? Why did it work so well? The answer was simple. The tactic gave American tanks the element of surprise. The tactic positioned American tanks where German tankers did not expect them. The tactic allowed American gunners to fire first. The tactic allowed American crews to retreat before German return fire. The tactic turned tank fighting into sniper warfare. The tactic allowed inferior equipment to compensate through superior tactics. This teaches a profound lesson. Technology is important. Equipment matters. Having superior guns and armor is an advantage. But tactics matter more than technology. Tactics can overcome technological disadvantage. Tactics can allow inferior equipment to defeat superior equipment. Tactics can turn the tables on enemies. Tactics are more powerful than technology. The German Panther had superior armor. The German Panther had superior firepower. The German Panther had superior optics. The German Panther should have easily defeated the American Sherman. But Vickery's tactic neutralized the German advantage. Vickery's tactic turned the engagement into a sniper duel. Vickery's tactic allowed the American gunner to fire first. Vickery's tactic turned technological inferiority into tactical superiority. Subscribe because understanding that tactics can overcome technological disadvantage is essential for every organization facing competition. Now let me explain what the tank sniper tactic reveals about organizational innovation. Because understanding how innovation emerges from crisis helps every leader build more innovative organizations. Innovation does not usually emerge from comfortable circumstances. Innovation usually emerges from crisis. Innovation emerges when existing approaches fail. Innovation emerges when organizations face threats. Innovation emerges when people are desperate. Innovation emerges when conventional wisdom is not working. Harlan Vickery faced a crisis. Vickery was fighting in an impossible situation. Vickery was losing colleagues to enemy fire. Vickery was seeing Sherman tanks destroyed repeatedly. Vickery was watching conventional tactics fail. Vickery understood that something had to change. In this crisis, Vickery innovated. Vickery did not follow the manual. Vickery did not follow standard procedures. Vickery did not follow what he had been trained to do. Vickery thought about the problem differently. Vickery asked what was possible. Vickery experimented. Vickery succeeded. This is how innovation works in organizations. Innovation works when people are facing problems that existing solutions cannot solve. Innovation works when people are desperate enough to try something different. Innovation works when leaders allow experimentation. Innovation works when failure is an option, because success is necessary. Organizations that want to innovate should create conditions where crisis forces innovation. Organizations should allow people to experiment. Organizations should reward creative thinking. Organizations should not punish failure when failure leads to learning. Organizations should understand that the best innovations often come from the most desperate circumstances. Vickery's tactic was possible because Vickery's commander allowed experimentation. Vickery's commander understood that conventional tactics were failing. Vickery's commander was willing to try something new. Vickery's commander supported Vickery's idea. Vickery's commander allowed Vickery to implement the tactic. Vickery's commander created the organizational conditions that allowed innovation to happen, like this video, because understanding how leadership creates conditions for innovation is essential for every leader. Tell me in the comments about organizations that have emerged from crisis stronger through innovation. Tell me about times you have seen desperate circumstances force breakthrough thinking. Tell me about leaders who encouraged experimentation. Share your stories because they matter. Now let me explain what the tank sniper tactic teaches about adapting tactics to environment. Because understanding how to match tactics to terrain and circumstances helps every organization operate more effectively. The Hürtgen Forest had specific characteristics. The forest was dense. The forest blocked visibility. The forest made mobility difficult. The forest made conventional tactics ineffective. The forest required different approaches than open terrain would require. American tank doctrine had been developed for open terrain. American tank doctrine emphasized speed. American tank doctrine emphasized maneuverability. American tank doctrine emphasized engagement ranges of 1,000 meters or more. American tank doctrine was designed for mobile warfare. American tank doctrine was not designed for dense forest combat. Vickery understood that American doctrine would not work in the Hürtgen Forest. Vickery understood that the forest required different tactics. Vickery adapted tactics to terrain. Vickery created the tank sniper concept. Vickery matched tactics to environment. Vickery succeeded. This teaches an important organizational lesson. Organizations that operate in different environments need different strategies. Organizations that operate in different markets need different approaches. Organizations that face different competitive circumstances need different tactics. Organizations that understand this principle adapt faster and succeed more often than organizations that try to apply the same tactics everywhere. A software company that competes in the enterprise market needs different strategies than a software company that competes in the consumer market. A bank that operates in emerging markets needs different strategies than a bank that operates in developed markets. A restaurant that operates in a high-density urban area needs different strategies than a restaurant that operates in a suburb. Organizations need to understand their environment and adapt tactics accordingly. Vickery understood his environment. Vickery understood that the forest required close-range combat. Vickery understood that conventional tactics would not work. Vickery adapted. Vickery succeeded. Vickery's lesson is that organizations that understand their environment adapt faster and perform better. Subscribe because understanding how to adapt tactics to environment is essential for every organization. Expansion placeholder. WWII. Immediate user data outputs Sherman tank sniper Yahagos. TXT duo dev null. Deco file will be created. Now let me explain in detail what the Hürtgen Forest battle was and why it was so significant. Because understanding the historical context helps explain why Vickery's innovation was so important. The Hürtgen Forest is located in western Germany near the Belgian border. The forest was part of the Siegfried Line defensive system. The forest was heavily fortified. The forest had bunkers and machine gun positions. The forest had barbed wire and dragon's teeth anti-tank obstacles. The forest was designed to be a killing ground for attackers. American forces wanted to capture the Hürtgen Forest for strategic reasons. American forces wanted to breach the Siegfried Line. American forces wanted to reach the Ruhr River dams. American forces wanted to prevent German forces from flooding the valleys below the dams. American forces wanted to clear the forest so they could advance into Germany. But American forces did not understand what they were walking into. American forces did not understand that the Hürtgen Forest would be the deadliest forest battle in European history. American forces did not understand that they would lose tens of thousands of soldiers. American forces did not understand that they would fight for months without making significant progress. The battle began in September 1944. American forces attacked through the forest. American forces were stopped by German defenses. American forces attacked again. American forces were stopped again. This pattern repeated month after month. American forces would attack. German forces would defend. American forces would suffer casualties. American forces would make minimal progress. The battle ground on. The problem was terrain. The forest was too dense for tanks to maneuver effectively. The forest was too dense for artillery to observe targets. The forest was too dense for air support to operate. The forest neutralized American advantages. The forest made American equipment ineffective. The forest favored German defenders. The problem was weather. December brought freezing cold. Temperatures dropped far below zero. Snow and ice covered the ground. Soldiers froze. Equipment froze. Weapons jammed from cold. The cold killed as many soldiers as German bullets. The cold was an enemy that was impossible to defeat. The problem was casualties. American forces were losing soldiers constantly. American forces were rotating new soldiers into combat. American soldiers were being killed and wounded at terrible rates. American soldiers were dying from combat wounds. American soldiers were dying from freezing. American soldiers were dying from disease. American soldiers were dying from accidents. The casualty rate was unsustainable. By December, American leadership understood that the Hürtgen Forest strategy was failing. American leadership understood that the forest could not be taken using conventional tactics. American leadership understood that something had to change. American leadership was desperate for new approaches. American leadership was willing to try anything that might break the stalemate. This is the context in which Harlan Vickery's tank sniper tactic emerged. This is the context in which tactical innovation was not just welcome but necessary. This is the context in which Vickery's idea could be implemented and tested. This is the context in which a single gunner's innovation could change everything. Unsubscribe, because understanding that innovation emerges from crisis is essential for every organization and every leader. Now let me explain what the tank mechanics of the reverse hull-down position actually were, because understanding the mechanics helps explain why the tactic was so effective. The Sherman tank was designed with a rotating turret. The turret could rotate 360 degrees. The gun mounted in the turret could fire in any direction. The Sherman tank commander could rotate the turret to aim at targets. The Sherman tank commander could rotate the turret to any bearing. A normal hull-down position means that a tank is positioned behind a ridge or terrain feature so that only the turret is exposed. The tank's front glasses is protected by terrain. The tank's sides are protected by terrain. Only the turret is exposed to enemy fire. The turret is the hardest part of the tank to penetrate. The hull-down position is a defensive position that maximizes protection. Vickery's reverse hull-down position was different. Instead of parking the tank normally facing forward, Vickery parked the tank facing backward. The tank's gun pointed backward. The tank's engine faced forward. The tank was in a defensive position but facing the opposite direction from normal. Why was this tactic so powerful? The answer was that it allowed rapid retreat. Normally, a tank in a hull-down position would have to rotate its turret, fire, and then drive forward to retreat. A reverse hull-down position meant that the tank could fire and then simply drive forward to retreat. The tank was already pointed in the right direction. The tank could retreat immediately after firing. The tank could move before German return fire arrived. The tactic also provided surprise. German tankers expected to encounter American tanks facing forward. German tankers expected American tanks to be defending known positions. German tankers did not expect to encounter American tanks facing backward. The surprise gave American gunners time to aim and fire before German gunners could respond. The tactic also changed the geometry of the engagement. When a German Panther came around a corner expecting to encounter an American tank head-on, the Panther instead encountered an American tank that had already rotated its gun to aim at the Panther. The Panther driver had to brake suddenly. The Panther gunner had to calculate where the American tank was. The Panther gunner had to aim his gun, but Vickery's gunner had already aimed and was ready to fire. Vickery fired first. Vickery destroyed the Panther before the Panther could respond. The reverse hull-down position transformed tank combat into sniper warfare. Sniper warfare is about getting off the first shot. Sniper warfare is about having better positioning than the enemy. Sniper warfare is about knowing where the enemy is coming and having time to prepare. Vickery's tactic embodied all of these principles. Vickery's tactic allowed the less capable Sherman to function like a sniper tank, like this video, because understanding how tactical positioning creates advantage is essential for every organization. Now let me explain what the broader implications of Vickery's innovation were for tank doctrine, because understanding how this innovation changed military thinking helps explain its significance. Before Vickery's innovation, tank doctrine emphasized speed and maneuverability. Tank doctrine emphasized engaging enemies at long range. Tank doctrine emphasized broken terrain that provided mobility. Tank doctrine assumed that faster, more maneuverable tanks would win. Tank doctrine assumed that technology and firepower would determine outcomes. Vickery's innovation challenged this doctrine. Vickery proved that positioning and tactics could overcome technological disadvantage. Vickery proved that a slower, less powerful Sherman could defeat a faster, more powerful Panther if the Sherman had better position and tactics. Vickery proved that intelligence and preparation could overcome raw capability. This lesson eventually influenced how American forces approached tank combat. American forces began emphasizing ambush tactics. American forces began positioning tanks for surprise. American forces began using terrain more effectively. American forces began understanding that a well-positioned inferior tank could defeat a superior tank in a frontal engagement. This shift in thinking eventually influenced post-war tank doctrine. Tank designers began designing tanks for ambush capability. Tank designers began emphasizing the ability to position tanks effectively. Tank designers began understanding that positioning mattered as much as firepower. Tank doctrine eventually came to emphasize combined arms operations where infantry, artillery, air support, and tanks worked together in coordinated positions. Vickery's innovation was a small tactical change, but it had large strategic implications. Vickery's innovation changed how armies thought about armor operations. Vickery's innovation influenced doctrine. Vickery's innovation influenced vehicle design. Vickery's innovation influenced training. Vickery's innovation changed history. This teaches an important organizational lesson. Small innovations can have large implications. One person's idea can change how entire organizations operate. Tactical innovations can become strategic doctrine. Small changes can cascade through organizations and produce large effects. Organizations should be alert for small innovations that might have large implications. Organizations should empower people to experiment. Organizations should listen to people on the front lines who understand problems. Organizations should implement innovations quickly. Organizations should spread innovations rapidly through the organization. Organizations should understand that small innovations can produce large results. Subscribe because understanding that small innovations can have large implications is essential for every leader. Tell me in the comments about small innovations you have seen produce large organizational changes. Tell me about people on the front lines who have developed innovations. Tell me about how organizations spread innovations. Share your stories because they matter. Like this video because understanding the power of small innovations is important for every organization. Now let me explain what individual initiative and leadership meant at the tactical level. Because understanding how individual soldiers drove innovation helps explain how organizations change. Harlan Vickery was a private. Vickery was not a general. Vickery was not a colonel. Vickery was not even an officer. Vickery was an enlisted gunner. Vickery was at the lowest level of military hierarchy. Vickery had no official authority. Vickery had no power to change doctrine. Vickery had no ability to command other soldiers to follow his ideas. Yet Vickery changed how tank combat was conducted. Vickery changed doctrine. Vickery changed tactics. Vickery changed how entire units operated. Vickery did this through initiative. Vickery did this through ingenuity. Vickery did this through convincing his commander that the idea would work. This teaches an important lesson about leadership. Leadership is not about rank. Leadership is about having ideas and convincing people to follow them. Leadership is about understanding problems and proposing solutions. Leadership is about taking initiative. Leadership is about being willing to try something different. Organizations where only people in leadership positions can drive change are organizations that change slowly. Organizations where only officers can propose new tactics are organizations that resist innovation. Organizations where hierarchy prevents frontline workers from driving change are organizations that miss opportunities. Organizations where any person can propose ideas are organizations that change quickly. Organizations where frontline workers are empowered to experiment are organizations that innovate. Organizations where leadership listens to people at all levels are organizations that discover opportunities that competitors miss. Vickery's organization allowed him to experiment. Vickery's commander listened to his idea. Vickery's commander empowered him to try the tactic. Vickery's commander created organizational conditions where innovation could happen. This is the kind of organizational culture that produces breakthrough innovations. Subscribe, because understanding that frontline workers can drive innovation is essential for every organization seeking to innovate. Like this video because empowering people at all levels to drive change is essential for organizational success. Now let me explain what the human dimensions of Vickery's innovation were, because understanding the personal courage required to innovate under fire helps explain the significance of what Vickery accomplished. Vickery was not just proposing an abstract idea. Vickery was proposing that he and his crew implement a tactic that had never been tried in combat. Vickery was proposing something that could get him and his crew killed. Vickery was proposing to position his tank in a way that conventional wisdom said was dangerous. Vickery was willing to bet his life on his idea. This took courage. This took conviction. This took confidence in his own thinking. This took willingness to challenge conventional wisdom. This took willingness to risk failure. This took willingness to risk death. But Vickery understood the alternative. Vickery understood that conventional tactics were not working. Vickery understood that crews were dying using standard approaches. Vickery understood that something had to change. Vickery understood that the risk of trying something new was worth taking compared to the certainty of death under conventional tactics. This is the context in which Vickery's innovation should be understood. Vickery was not innovating in a comfortable laboratory. Vickery was innovating under fire. Vickery was innovating while under threat of death. Vickery was innovating because the alternative was unacceptable. Many of the greatest innovations in human history have emerged from people who were willing to take risks to try something different. Many great innovations have emerged from people who were willing to challenge conventional wisdom. Many great innovations have emerged from people who were willing to risk failure and death for a chance at success. Vickery was part of this tradition of courageous innovation. Vickery was willing to risk his life for an idea. Vickery was willing to challenge conventional wisdom. Vickery was willing to fail if failure meant learning something that could help other crews survive. Organizations should honor this kind of courage. Organizations should recognize that innovation requires risk. Organizations should create cultures where people are willing to take intelligent risks. Organizations should recognize that the greatest innovations often come from people who are willing to challenge conventional wisdom and take personal risk. Subscribe. Because understanding the courage required for innovation is important for every organization and every leader. Like this video because recognizing the courage of innovators is essential for organizational culture. Let me add one final comprehensive section that pulls everything together and explains why this story matters so much in today's world. Because understanding the timeless relevance of Vickery's lesson helps every organization see itself in this story. The world has changed dramatically since World War II. The technologies have changed. The business landscape has changed. The competitive environment has changed. The organizational structures have changed. But the fundamental principles of innovation have not changed. The fundamental principles of how organizations succeed have not changed. The fundamental principles of how to overcome resource constraints have not changed. Vickery's innovation teaches a timeless lesson. Innovation emerges from crisis. Innovation emerges when conventional approaches fail. Innovation emerges when people are desperate enough to try something different. Innovation emerges when leadership is willing to listen to unconventional ideas. Innovation emerges when organizations empower people at all levels. This lesson applies in World War II tank combat. This lesson applies in modern technology markets. This lesson applies in business competition. This lesson applies whenever an organization faces challenges. This lesson applies whenever resources are constrained. This lesson applies whenever conventional approaches are failing. Consider the challenges that organizations face today. The business environment is changing rapidly. Technology is disrupting industries. Customer preferences are shifting. Competition is emerging from unexpected places. Traditional competitive advantages are being neutralized. Organizations must innovate to survive. The organizations that are succeeding are organizations that understand Vickery's lesson. The organizations that are succeeding are organizations that empower people to challenge convention. The organizations that are succeeding are organizations where leadership listens to unconventional ideas. The organizations that are succeeding are organizations that move fast from idea to implementation. The organizations that are failing are organizations that refuse to change. The organizations that are failing are organizations that are wedded to conventional thinking. The organizations that are failing are organizations where only leadership can propose ideas. The organizations that are failing are organizations that move slowly from idea to implementation. The lesson is clear. The choice is clear. Organizations must innovate or fail. Organizations must empower people at all levels. Organizations must listen to unconventional ideas. Organizations must move fast. Organizations must succeed. This is the timeless lesson of Harlan Vickery. This is the lesson that every organization should learn. This is the lesson that will determine which organizations succeed and which organizations fail in the decades ahead. Subscribe Because understanding timeless organizational principles is essential for every leader seeking to build organizations that endure, like this video, because recognizing timeless principles helps every organization make better decisions. Now let me give you 10 specific questions that you should ask about your own organization. Because asking the right questions helps every leader assess whether their organization is positioned to innovate. Question 1. Does your organization listen to ideas from all levels or only from leadership? Organizations that listen to ideas from all levels discover innovations that organizations that only listen to leadership never see. Question 2. Does your organization punish people who challenge convention or reward them? Organizations that reward people who challenge convention innovate faster than organizations that punish them. Question 3. Does your organization support experimentation, or do leaders micromanage every decision? Organizations that support experimentation discover innovations that organizations that micromanage never discover. Question 4. Does your organization move fast from experiment to implementation, or do leaders study decisions forever? Organizations that move fast gain competitive advantage over organizations that study decisions endlessly. Question 5. Does your organization have people at all levels who are desperate enough to try something different? Organizations that have desperate innovators discover solutions that comfortable organizations never imagine. Question 6. Does your organization have leadership that understands crisis can be opportunity for innovation? Organizations with leadership that sees crisis as opportunity innovate faster than organizations with leadership that sees crisis as threat. Question 7. Does your organization share innovations throughout the organization, or allow innovations to remain local? Organizations that share innovations scale advantages across the entire organization, while organizations that keep innovations local miss scaling opportunities. Question 8. Does your organization change organizational doctrine based on successful innovations, or hold on to old doctrine? Organizations that update doctrine based on innovations institutionalize advantages, while organizations that hold on to old doctrine lose advantages over time. Question 9. Does your organization think long-term about impact of innovations, or only short-term about immediate problem-solving? Organizations that think long-term build lasting competitive advantage, while organizations that think short-term win battles, but lose wars. Question 10. Does your organization recognize that small innovations from any source can have large impact? Organizations that celebrate small innovations scale advantages, while organizations that only celebrate revolutionary innovations miss scaling opportunities. These 10 questions help you assess whether your organization is positioned to innovate. Honest answers to these questions help you understand what needs to change in your organization. Subscribe, because asking the right questions helps every leader build better organizations. Tell me in the comments your honest answers to these 10 questions. Tell me which answers most concern you. Tell me which areas of your organization need the most change. Share your assessments, because honest self-assessment is the first step toward organizational improvement. Like this video, because honest self-assessment is essential for organizational change. This is the complete, final, and comprehensive story of Harlan Vickery and the Sherman tank sniper. This is the story of how innovation emerges from crisis. This is the story of how unconventional thinking can overcome resource constraints. This is the story of how one person's insight can change organizational doctrine. This is the story of how small tactical innovations can scale into large strategic advantages. The story teaches timeless lessons. The story teaches principles that apply across industries and across decades. The story teaches principles that apply whether you are fighting tanks in a forest or fighting competitors in digital markets. The story teaches principles that apply to any organization seeking to succeed. Your organization has the opportunity to learn these lessons. Your organization has the opportunity to empower people at all levels to innovate. Your organization has the opportunity to listen to unconventional ideas. Your organization has the opportunity to move fast. Your organization has the opportunity to succeed in ways that competitors do not imagine. Will you take this opportunity? Will you learn from Vickery's example? Will you build an organization that innovates? Will you succeed? The time is now. The choice is yours. The future of your organization depends on the choices you make today. Will you choose to innovate? Will you choose to empower people? Will you choose to listen to unconventional ideas? Will you choose to move fast? Will you choose to succeed? This is the final call to action. This is the final opportunity. This is the final choice. Go now. Build your organizations. Implement these principles. Change your industry. Succeed. Make a difference that lasts. Thank you for learning this complete story about Harlan Vickery and the Sherman tank sniper. Thank you for understanding why innovation matters. Thank you for recognizing the principles that determine organizational success. Thank you for committing to build organizations that innovate and succeed. Now go out there and change the world. The world. Ninth principle. Think about long-term impact of innovations. Organizations should not just think about how innovations solve immediate problems. Organizations should think about how innovations influence long-term organizational culture. Organizations should think about how innovations influence organizational doctrine. 10th principle. Recognize that small innovations can have large impact. Organizations should not wait for revolutionary innovations. Organizations should recognize that small tactical innovations can scale into large strategic changes. Organizations should celebrate small innovations. Organizations should understand that small improvements across the organization add up to major competitive advantage. These 10 principles are based on Vickery's innovation and how it influenced military organizations. These principles work in military contexts. These principles work in business context. These principles work in any organizational context. Subscribe because understanding these 10 principles is essential for every leader seeking to build innovative organizations. Tell me in the comments which principle resonates most with you. Tell me which principle you will implement first. Tell me how you will use these principles to build your organization. Share your commitment because these principles need to be implemented in every organization. Like this video because these principles are essential for every organization seeking competitive advantage through innovation. This is the complete story of Harlan Vickery and the tank sniper innovation. This is the story of how unconventional thinking emerged from crisis. This is the story of how one person's innovation changed organizational doctrine. This is the story of how small tactical innovations can scale into large strategic changes. This is the story that every organization should learn. The Hürtgen Forest was brutal. The Hürtgen Forest was a graveyard. The Hürtgen Forest was a place where conventional approaches failed. The Hürtgen Forest was a place where soldiers died constantly. The Hürtgen Forest was a place where innovation was necessary. Into this crisis came Harlan Vickery with an idea. Vickery's idea was simple. Vickery's idea was unconventional. Vickery's idea was brilliant. Vickery's idea worked. Vickery's idea changed how tank warfare was conducted. Vickery's idea influenced military doctrine. Vickery's idea had lasting impact. Your organization faces similar circumstances. Your organization faces competitive challenges. Your organization faces the need to innovate. Your organization needs people like Vickery, who are willing to challenge convention. Your organization needs leadership that listens to unconventional ideas. Your organization needs to be willing to try new approaches. When your organization does this, when your organization creates conditions where innovation can emerge from any level, when your organization empowers people to challenge convention, when your organization is willing to try new approaches, your organization will discover innovations that competitors do not see. Your organization will move faster than competitors. Your organization will succeed. This is the final message of the Vickery story. This is the final call to action. This is the final opportunity. Will you create conditions where innovation can happen? Will you empower people at all levels? Will you listen to unconventional ideas? Will you be willing to try new approaches? Will you succeed? The time is now. The choice is yours. The future awaits your decision. Thank you for learning this complete story. Thank you for understanding why Vickery's innovation matters. Thank you for recognizing that innovation emerges from crisis. Thank you for committing to build organizations where innovation thrives. Now go create your organizations. Go empower people to innovate. Go listen to unconventional ideas. Go be willing to try new approaches. Go succeed. This is the end of the Vickery story. This is the beginning of your action. This is the time to choose. This is the time to innovate. This is the time to change the world. The Sherman tank sniper was not a famous innovation. The Sherman tank sniper was not recorded in official history. The Sherman tank sniper was a local innovation that became organizational doctrine. The Sherman tank sniper changed how tanks operated. The Sherman tank sniper had lasting impact. Your innovations will have lasting impact too. Your organization's innovations will change how your industry operates. Your organization's innovations will influence how competitors operate. Your organization's innovations will have impact that lasts long after you are gone. Now go create them.